Hello, my name is Matthew Ferris, and I am the pastor here at Matthew 2540 Ministries and at Means of Grace Church in Mendenhall. And I wanted to come to you today to tell you about a story that happened to us at our shelter there at Matthew 2540 Ministries. And God just showed up. He showed up in so many miraculous ways. But this is a story that many people have heard parts of. Many people have heard little bits and pieces of it. But a lot of people desire to hear the whole story. And so I was going to come to you today and just let you know what happened as God provided in a miraculous way. And so we were at the shelter, and as we were there, we were having a little bit of trouble with our fundraising, and so we were quite low in money. Matter of fact, we had about $20 in the account. And I looked at the account, and I knew that we didn't have the monies to pay our bills, but I also knew that we support ourselves by selling clothes, a big 18-wheeler truckload of clothes, and once we got that full, we could sell it. Well, the good news was we had it full. And it was about to go to market, and we were about to sell it. I called the buyer, and he said, yeah, just as soon as it rolls out on Monday morning, we're going to wire the money into your account. We wouldn't need the money until Wednesday or Thursday of the week to pay the bill, so it was all fine. And then I went out and called the trucking company, and they said, sure, we can pick it up. Everything was arranged. And then I began to notice later that afternoon that it began to sink on one side into the mud, and one of the legs began to sink. As it did, it started to cave in. I thought, wow, if that truck collapsed, we're in trouble. And so we got under there and tried to jack it up and work on it, but it had 40,000 pounds of clothes in it. That was an impossible task to stop it, and it just kept caving in until eventually the whole front of the trailer just came crashing down, broke the legs, smashed part of the frame on the trailer, and left it buried up in the mud. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my goodness, there went our whole load and everything we can do. What can we do? It's about to start raining. So I went back to my porch and I sat down and I called the buyer and I said, the truck's not coming. I said, it makes me sick in my stomach to tell you, but the truck's not coming. He said, why not? And I told him what happened. Then I called the trucking company and I told them, don't send any truck to pick it up. We don't need a truck. Cancel the order. And he said, are you sure? I said, yes. And then I sit back on my seat and I thought, wow, there's nothing I can do. I can't work all night. I can't get the clothes, and it's about to start raining, and that truck's now probably got a hole in it. It's probably leaking, and by tomorrow morning, the clothes will probably be burnt anyway, even if we could do anything, which we couldn't, no matter what. So there was nothing within my power to fix that situation, no matter work, no matter anything I could do. And I just said, Lord, I said, that's the only thing I know how to do. We've reached the end of all that we know how to do. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I was sure the Lord would provide in some way, but I didn't see how. And then about that time, we were about a mile down the end of a gravel road, if you've never been to our shelter. And I look up, and there's an 18-wheeler coming up the road. And I thought to myself, why is this guy even here? Why is he coming up this road to do this, anything up in here? You know, it's at the end of the road. And so I went down and talked to him, and turns out that he was turned around and lost and looking for another place. And so I said, well, you need to get turned around. He said, yeah. I said, well, it'll be good if you get turned around before the rain, because when that rain comes in, it's going to be hard down in here. And he said, yeah. And so he goes down to turn around. But as he reaches the place where he's supposed to turn around, he sees the truck that has fallen and collapsed. And he said, would you like me to take this truck for you to where you wanted it to go? And I said, well, we was trying to get it down to Florida. I said, but we are, it's all broken. We can't take it. He said, well, I'd be glad to take it. And I said, you want to take this truck? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'd love for you to, but as you see, the legs have collapsed. It's broken. He said, well, what's wrong with my truck? Let's put it in it. And I said, we're going to put it in your truck? He said, you want to drive this from Mississippi down to Orlando? And he said, I would certainly love to do that. I said, okay. That'd be good. I said, just back your truck up and I'll go get the men and we'll start loading these clothes out of here. And I was excited. Maybe the Lord has provided. And so I started down to the shelter. But as I started down to the shelter, I thought to myself, that's 40,000 pounds of clothes. And there's no way. It would take 8, 9 hours if we worked from the time this happened all the way until 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning. We couldn't get it done. And besides, it's fixing to start raining, and it's going to be dark, and it's cold, and that's an impossible task. So I came back and I said, brother, I would love for you to take this, but it's an impossible task because we can't load this. And he said, well, I'll sleep in my sleeper cab, and we can load it tomorrow. And I thought, wow, you want to sleep in a sleeping cab, load it tomorrow? He said, certainly, I'll do it. And so I said, okay, that gives us an avenue where we can work, we can make this happen. I was not looking forward to loading 40,000 pounds of clothes, but I went down to get all the men and rally them. Certainly, they weren't looking forward to loading that, but I said, we'll load some of it tonight, and in the morning, we will get up, after church, because it was Saturday night. After church, we'll load some more, and we can make this happen. But on the way, I was just thinking, man, I sure don't feel like loading 40,000 pounds of clothes. That is a lot of stuff in these weather conditions and this time. And so I got the men down there, and they started. But we had posted up on Facebook. And as we put this thing on Facebook, different people began to read it, and they began to share it. They began to go around to other people. And there was a whole group of people who saw this and responded. One other homeless shelter also responded, and they came out, and other people from the community. And so a lot of people from the community came out, almost like a flash mob of people, to come out and actually help us load this truck. And so I looked up, and there's all kinds of people we didn't even know, people we never met, just showed up, and they're out there along with our men. They're loading this truck and getting it done. And I'm just amazed. Look what God is doing. He's provided a truck. He's provided a way to load this. And then I went up and started talking to the truck driver and reassured him, hey, brother, I think we're going to make this. We're going to get it loaded. And I started telling him, hey, we run a homeless shelter, because I hadn't even told him what we do yet. I don't even know the trucker's name. And he says, well, I was telling him all about our program and how we help the homeless. We help them get back on their feet. And I was telling him all the physical things we do for people. And then he looks at me, the truck driver, and he says, brother, if you don't tell them the gospel of Jesus, you're not doing anything. And I said, wow, this is a Christian truck driver. All right, praise the Lord. I said, so you're a Christian, brother? He said, I certainly am. He said, I am a pastor who goes to seminary, and I'm just supporting myself by driving this truck while I go to seminary. And I stopped, and I said, wow. I said, brother, how did you really get down there on this gravel road? And then he told me, he said, well, Brother Ferris, he said, I tell you what, about 250 miles from here, I stopped and I prayed. And I asked the Lord today, he said, I want you to use me, use my truck, and give me a paying load. And I prayed to be used by the Lord, and I prayed for a paying load. And then he stopped, and I said, and that prayer brought you to this location? He said, yes, sir, it sure did. And so at that point, I'm just thinking that the Lord was pressing upon my heart and saying, you need to ask this guy to preach in the morning. And I was thinking I should. I felt like I should. I felt like I should ask him to come and speak at the church. But then again, I'm thinking, I just met this guy. I don't know him. I don't know him from Adam. He could be anything, And so I was reluctant, and I didn't want to ask him. But it was like the Lord spoke to my soul and just said, why can't I be in charge? I've been in charge of this whole thing. You didn't do any of this. Why can't I be in charge? And I realized the only thing I had gotten accomplished was to collapse the truck. And so I said, brother, would you like to preach in the morning? He said, at your church? I said, sure. He said, I'd be honored. I preach the gospel anywhere, anytime. And I said, well, then in the morning, you preach at the church. And he said, that would be awesome. And so I went inside, and as I was inside the house, my wife, she said, what are y'all doing out there? I said, well, we're loading up the truck. And she said, I thought we canceled the truck. And I said, I did cancel the truck, but the Lord sent another truck. She said, and you fixing to load it at this hour? Can we do that? I said, no, we can't load it at this hour, but if you look outside, you'll see there's a whole lot of people that have just showed up. God provided a crew of people to load this thing. And where do they all come from? I said, I don't know. I don't even know these people. And they're loading, and while they're loading and watching, she said, well, I still don't think we'll get it loaded by in the morning. I said, well, we probably won't. We probably have a little more to do. She said, well, is he going to wait? Is the truck driver going to wait? I said, he'll wait. And she said, he knows we're going to church in the morning, right? And all these, the people loading, they're all going to church. I said, he knows. And she said, how do you know he'll wait? I said, well, he's preaching. And she said, the truck driver's preaching in the morning? I said, yeah, I told you the Lord sent him. And so while this truck's being loaded, there's a couple that calls me. And they call me, and they're from out of state. And they want to meet with me and talk with me. Again, a couple I've never met, people I've never seen, people I didn't know. And they wanted me to go out to eat, me and my wife. And I started to say, well, I'm a little busy right now because that truck was being loaded. But my manager, he tells me, he says, Pastor, there's a lot of people out here loading this truck. You don't need to get in there and load the truck. We already got enough people. You need to go meet with this couple. I said, okay, I'll go meet with them. So I went up there, and we're eating, and I tell them the story just like I've told you. I tell the story. Well, at the end of the story, they wanted to see it. So they went out there to see it. And they said, well, what are you going to do about this truck that collapsed? And I said, I don't know. And they said, well, we want to help with that. So not only did they say they want to help, they wrote a $2,000 check and gave it to us to help with our ministry. And they offered to rent a crane or something to pick the truck up if we needed to. But they ultimately gave a $2,000 check to help replace the dry van or the 18-wheeler trailer. And then they asked, why is everybody loading this all in the rain? I said, well, one day we want to build a building. We want to build a warehouse where we can do all these things in it and have stuff stored in the dry. And we want to build that. And they said, well, maybe we could help you. And then he looked at his wife and he said, honey, I think we need to build these good people a building. And she said, I think we do. And he said, Brother Ferris, he said, we want to contribute and we want to put a building up so you don't have to do this like this anymore. And he said, I'm not a builder, but I know people who is, and I can write a check. And so he went and found someone to do that the next day, and then he paid for the process of having this building built and put on our property. And the next day, when the truck driver got up here and preached at the church, God moved in a mighty way. This altar filled up with people. People got saved. People rededicated their life to the Lord. People came up and prayed and just called on the Lord. The altar just filled up. And I was amazed at what God was doing and how he was doing it among the people. And that evening, he laid out they laid out the building and drawed it out on the ground and contacted somebody and wrote the check. From the time that I had sit down on that porch and said, I can't do this. I have no power to make anything else work. I don't even know any other steps that I could take, no matter how much energy I exerted. It's like the Lord said, that's okay, because before dark, I'm going to take care of everything you got going on. I'm going to take care of the truck. I'm going to take care of the 10-year plan of building a building. I'm going to take care of the whole thing you got going on. I'm going to take care of all of it, and I'm going to do it today. And the Lord did. And that afternoon, when he got ready to go and he got ready to pull out, he got into the truck. The truck was all loaded with 40,000 pounds of clothes, and he put it in gear, and it wouldn't roll. The wheels was just spinning because it had rained, and it was a little slick, and the mud was a little bit of mud there, thin layer of mud, and it just wouldn't roll. And I put rocks under it, I put boards under it, I was doing everything I could. I said, we have got to get this truck out of here. What a great story. And it came in with this truck stuck and in here, and I was doing everything I could to get the rocks under it, and we'd get it to move a little bit, but it would be restuck. And the truck driver gets out, And he says to me, he said, Brother Ferris, listen, that truck will roll 1 second after Jesus wants it to roll. And I was thinking, okay, all right. And he said, I'll sleep another night in the sleeper cab. It's going to stop raining tonight. In the morning, it'll go. It's no problem. I said, you want to sleep another night? He said, yeah, it's no problem. So he slept another night in the cab. And I walked away, and I was thinking, yeah, that truck will roll. It'll roll 1 second after a tow truck hooks to it. That's what it's going to take to make it roll. That's what we're going to have a tow truck. I believe in Jesus. I trust Jesus. But we also need a tow truck. But I went back a little bit later that evening, invited him into my house to eat. He came in, he sat and ate with us, and I invited him to teach the Bible study, because every morning we have Bible study at the shelter. Pretty soon we're going to start putting those online for people to see if you'd like to join us. We have those Bible studies every morning. And in the Bible study, I asked him would he come and teach it the next morning. He said he'd be honored, and he did. And he sat there, and it was about 35-minute Bible study. And then as he finished up, he sat with some of the men who were touched by what he was saying, and he prayed with them, and they dedicated their life to the Lord, and he talked to them for a long time and prayed over men. And then he got up out of the devotion, he walked out, and as he was walking out of our devotion in the shelter back to the truck, there was a tow truck coming up the road. And they had saw the post we put on Facebook, and they had saw that the truck was also stuck after all that had happened. So they sent a tow truck out to help. They backed up to it. They hooked the chain to it. The winch started pulling. The truck started easily rolling forward, and it rolled out till it got a grip on the road. He unhooked it, and then the truck drove up. And they rolled down the window. And he looked at me and he said, see, Pastor, it'll roll. It'll roll 1 second after Jesus wants it to roll. And he thanked me, I thanked him, and he left taking the load to Florida. And the load arrived safely at Florida. We got paid, we paid the bills. And then one of the men said to me as he rolled off, he said, I think that truck was stuck just so that man could rededicate his life to the Lord. And I said, I think you're right. I think it was. See, God will show up. Sometimes he don't show up until the end of us. When all of our efforts and all of our things are falling short, we've for sure given all the efforts. We give all the effort we knew how to. But at the end of our efforts, sometimes God is just about to get started. And so I just wanted to share that story of how God kept us for another day and helped us in moving forward. And God is amazing, and he's no respecter of persons. He'll do that in your life just like he done it in our life. And we hope that you will follow what's going on at the shelter. We hope that you will see the progress. Pretty soon we're going to be putting up pictures of the pole barn and stuff, the enclosed warehouse there that they're building for us. And we hope that you will follow us. The information should be below on the bottom of the screen. And we thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing all of you in the future and seeing how God is moving. We'll be using this channel to tell stories like this and about how God shows up and shows out. And so we hope you'll stay tuned and see more of them. Thank you very much.